Hello and welcome. My name is Tiffany Farag, and welcome to Get to Know You, a podcast for those who want to open conversations and access deeper dialogue, where conversations can become stronger when we explore our thinking and behavior. Every Tuesday, a new question will be asked to a guest speaker. Genuine people here to have insightful conversations. My guest speaker today is from Perth, Australia, currently living in New York. He has been Global Chief Creative Officer at McCann Health since January of 2019, formerly Worldwide Chief Creative Officer of J. Walter Thompson. His career has taken him into numerous agencies, specialties and countries, including Australia, the UK and the US. He was a founding partner of MNC Saatchi in Australia before he went on to join DDB Australia as National Creative Director and Vice Chairman. In 2010, he moved to DDB New York as Chief Creative Officer and was listed as the fifth most awarded Chief Creative Officer worldwide. In 2016, he led J. Walter Thompson to a historic year, winning a total of 80 Cannes Lions. More recently, in 2019, he led McCann Health to win the coveted Cannes Healthcare Network of the Year. During his career, he has been a highly awarded international creative, responsible for some of the most innovative and recognizable creative projects in advertising today. Welcoming Matt Eastwood to Get to Know You. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you so much. That's an embarrassingly nice introduction.
It's well deserved as well, of course. And why so? Actually, now I'm quite curious. Why so embarrassed?
Oh, I don't know. It's hard to listen to nice things about yourself. But
Yeah.
no, it's funny when you hear it back like that. So no, I've been very lucky. I've been able to sort of travel the world and do the job I love for many years now. So it's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. And I'm actually quite curious. So what's a typical day for a global chief creative officer?
Well, it's very, especially So we have 60 offices around the world, and we're pretty much in every region and country, all the major ones. So it kind of starts early. It usually starts around 7 a.m. Sometimes earlier than that. Usually with someone like China or Japan, and checking in on projects that we're doing there. And then sort of just going across the world, traveling through the time zone of as different people wake up. A lot of what I do is coordinate global responses to client briefs. So bringing together, the best people in our different offices around the world to work on a project. And then, the other part that's a big part of my job is sort of recruitment and finding the talent to work within the agencies around the world. And sort of managing that talent, because we probably have 700 or 800 creative people around the world working for the company who I help set the vision for them and push them to hopefully be the best creative people they can be.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's good. So do you get, are you able to, if you want to, have a bit more hands-on, a bit closer with each project?
Yeah, and I definitely the big global ones are the things which could really use some sort of input from someone like myself. Like it makes sense particularly when you're bringing together different parts of the company. Just the reporting structure needs to be in place. So, if I bring in someone from Japan and someone from London, they need to report up into someone. So that's me. So that lets me get quite close to, those big global projects. And, as you said in the intro, the beauty of my background is I have worked in Australia. I haven't lived in Asia, but I've done a lot of work in Asia. I have lived in London, so I've done a lot of work in Europe, and now I've spent 15 years in the States. So I actually have able to sort of gathered a fairly good international sensibility that helps solve client problems that are global. So and I think the thing I've found is that sort of makes me slightly unique in the advertising industry, having worked across so many different kind of continents.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. And do you ever come across cultural kind of barriers when you're dealing with advertising and what each country sees as, oh, this is going to market well, and what somebody else might see? Wouldn't that be a bit of a clash?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, particularly, in countries like the Middle East and Asia, where customs are hugely different. It's one of the interesting things that I've actually discovered this many years ago, but it was around motherhood And when brands are sort of marketing to mothers, as a lot do, the whole idea in the States around motherhood, and I think it's evolving, but it was for a long time, it was like the super mom. It was like the mom who could do everything. She could manage a
Sure.
job, she could run a household, she could raise kids and everything. And that idea in Europe is really antithetical to what a lot of European countries believe. They don't want to be those super moms. They want to be like, they want to have a life, and
Yeah.
they don't live for all of those things.
No.
So when you sort of think of a concept which celebrates the super mum in America, it's not going to translate well into Europe because they don't believe in that idea. So that's that, and there's so many things like that that you just discover along the way of when you sort of dig into the culture of different countries. And I love the sort of cultural anthropology side of that, of just understanding the different roles of people in societies in different cultures and countries.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, like, is there some way of avoiding kind of, the painted picture of a person? Like, would you say if you're working with the Middle East, if you portray a person, you kind of need to be aware of the clothing that they're wearing and things like this,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
something
yeah.
like that. So, is that
Well,
something to avoid?
yeah. I mean, and it's interesting because things that you don't consider controversial in one country or region can be hugely controversial in other regions. Uh, sticking with that idea of portrayal of women, like portrayal of women in Russia, for instance. If you do work that they quite like to be a bit outlandish in the way they display their wealth, and the wealth is very outward facing. But the Middle East is the complete opposite. Like you don't, there's obviously incredible wealth in the Middle East because rich families, but you can't overtly display that. So it's really, it's interesting when you have to bring a brand to two places like that, and generally a lot of clients want one campaign around the world, but trying to help them understand that you need sort of freedom within that framework of adjusting it to local cultural insights. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge, but it is something that you become increasingly aware of. And China is interesting. So a lot of campaigns are about in the States it's about empowerment and stand up for yourself, etc., which is very opposite of
Mm,
China, because because independent thought there is a little bit frowned upon, and
yes.
you don't rally against the government. You play the role of a good corporate citizen and stuff. So a lot of the tone of work that comes out of the States just doesn't resonate at all with Chinese, particularly youth, because they don't have that rebellious spirit in the same way that youth in the United States might have. So yeah, it's I mean, it's hugely fascinating. You could study just the whole differences across the world endlessly, I think.
Absolutely. And that kind of makes me think like sometimes like it would be hard because you're dealing with different cultures. Like we know, some countries will be, we know our culture best. We know what they're going to appeal to. So you bringing in your knowledge or your ideas from other cultures won't necessarily work for us. Like
Yes,
even though you,
exactly.
you want innovation and creativity, it's like, oh, that's still not, that's going to backfire.
Yeah, well, and then you layer on the context of doing business so not even advertising, but the business of advertising. So, Japan, for instance, is very hierarchical, and you don't challenge your bosses. Like
Mm,
it's just that's the way they are, and they don't like to say no. They like to say yes. And so, understanding trying to get beyond the level of, well, we had a great meeting. They said yes, 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 but actually it doesn't mean that. It's
oh,
different. So
wow.
it's very interesting, and of course things like that. You're doing it in a second language, so there's always a translator, and so
Yeah.
yeah, it's incredibly interesting to understand even the way people do business in different countries and their behavior and the codes of how they talk to you, etc., and the way they give feedback. So yeah, it's interesting, and that's what I get exposed to a lot because I'm mostly dealing with global projects.
So I would say you'd have to play like a psychology, like you're trying to read up on psychology and human behavior in the role that you're
Yeah,
playing
yeah,
in with different cultures and so on. Like you said, everyone deals with business differently, and even the slangs. Like in advertising, you see like kind of not jokes, but like
yeah,
like idiomas, like they're very like. a funny thing would be one funny in one culture, and the other culture would be like, it doesn't translate. You're like, well,
Yeah,
what does that even
absolutely.
mean?
And I mean, we're both Australian, so Australia has a certain sense of humor, and we're pretty. It can be pretty blunt humor. That's
Yeah,
what we find funny,
exactly.
and having directed campaigns in both Europe and in the US, the sense of humor is very different because
Mm,
Londoners like they like their humor subtle and very like intelligent humor, whereas America tends to like a bit more slapstick, a bit more sort of in your face humor.
yeah.
And it was very funny because when I first moved and was like working with creative departments, in the States, these young creators would say, no, no, it's really funny. Like, and I'm like,
They're trying to
is it
convince
though?
you.
Yeah. And I'm like, is it
Yeah.
really? Because I'm like, I don't have that. I didn't grow up with that kind of
No.
influence. So it's interesting.
Absolutely, that's very interesting. I kind of wanted to chat with you too because you mentioned to me before, and I've obviously heard from a lot of people who've worked with you, and it's kind of a little bit off track now, but you've got this these words on your wall: "Work hard, be nice," and
Yeah.
someone who's been able to grow so well and move up. There's people have this added thinking of that, the attitude to rise up and do well, like the, rough Wall Street kind of attitude and be hard and aggressive. So, like, why do you have these on your wall? Like, did something, I guess, kind of happen, or have you felt something or noticed something as you've been
Yeah.
moving up?
I mean, definitely as a younger creative I worked for some bosses who frankly were just like the way of get them trying to get the best out of you was, I found it quite demeaning and demoralizing. And, they would just be thinking that if they push you hard and rude to you and, that you'll go away and you'll do better and come back with better ideas. And it never motivated me.
Mm,
I just felt like I didn't want to try because it was a horrible environment. And so I think early on when I realized I'd worked for people like that, I made this conscious decision. I never wanted to be like that. And I realized that as I started directing people, that you can get so much more out of them if you're kind and nice and motivate them in a positive way. Um, and I think the challenge has been like a lot of people often say, well, if you're too nice, you don't get, how do you get good work?
yeah, that's right. They say that.
And yeah, I mean, you've heard that before. And the thing I always say is, you can be tough on the work, but nice to the people. Like, you don't have
Yeah.
to make it a personal attack when
No.
someone, doesn't do what you think you want them to do. You can have an argument, and I don't mind having an argument about the creative work and like, let's argue about that product. But I'm not going to say, well, if you did your job properly, then we'd have better work.
Yeah.
Because I think that's the thing when you swing it, and that's often what happened is, you swing it over into the personal thing, and that's demotivating to people. So, I think as long as you can be as tough as you like on the work, but just be kind to the people, and then they'll keep coming back, and they'll want to come back. So that's how that's kind of my philosophy of very much trying to hire people who reflect that. And I've made mistakes over the years and hired people who haven't fitted that mold. And I try to adjust pretty quickly and go, it's not going to work because, I don't like that behavior. But I think, I like to think that the creative track record of, success and awards and all that has come out of that behavior, and it works. So,
Yeah.
and I just think it makes people more motivated to come to work and enjoy the process. And
Exactly. They want to be around. They want to be around you. They want to be
yeah,
around
yeah,
the environment you created. Do you think this a
yeah.
philosophy has been adopted though, or in your kind of industry by like other fields, or you don't think you think it's still quite rare?
I think it's getting more and more adopted. I think because for me, one of the big changes that's happened is, millennials and centennials and, younger workforce, they have proven that they are willing to walk away from a job um, without another job if they don't think it fits their code of what they want. They're like, you know what, I don't need this. And in my day, when I was 23, you just would never walk away from your job. You'd like, even if it's the worst thing in the world, you'd put up with it until you had another job, and that was just
Yeah.
the sort of the cultural thing that happened. But now I think kids are young people are much more empowered and have much more belief and confidence in themselves. So I think they they won't tolerate the behavior of someone treating them badly. I think they'll just be like, well, you know what, I don't need to do this, so see you later, and they'll go and find something else, some other way to make money. So I think that the good news about that is I think that's encouraging people to create better workplaces, more diverse workplaces, more kinder workplaces, and it's more authentic work environments, and so I think that is starting to become more of a mandate than a choice. But it's not to say. I mean, I think there are still people out there who don't treat people well and don't create the kind of environment that people want to live in. I mean, it sort of comes back to me. One of my mentors said to me when I first became a chief creative officer. He said to me, "Your job is not to create great advertising. Your job is to cause it." And what he meant by that is, like, it's not literally, you don't have to go in there and write the ads. You have to create an environment that causes other people to create incredible work. And
Yes.
that's, to me, once I understood that, oh, it's about the environment I create where people feel safe and comfortable and creative, and then that's when I'm going to get the best work. So that's what I've kind of driven to do the whole time. And that, I think that makes a difference to people's creativity.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's what, like, brings up a study that I was researching about, Brené Brown, and she was talking about vulnerability, and that when leaders are able to be vulnerable and create that
Yes.
atmosphere, then it increases creativity, innovation, and trust in the work environment, and people want to come to work and perform, and just you start being more innovative, which I thought was like
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah. No, it's super important, because I think, I mean, particularly in creative, if you create an environment where people are afraid to say something that they think might be dumb or might be wrong, and so they just don't say it in the end, then you're never going to get to sort of truly innovative ideas if people are afraid to take risk. And I think that's the thing of, as someone who's grown up as a creative my whole career, it is a job where you feel exposed the whole time. You feel you constantly have imposter syndrome, like, oh, I'm not very good at this, and I think that's what makes us great. And if you add to that a fear of actually saying the ideas that you have, because you'll be chastised, or someone will, then that's not an environment that will create innovation, to your point.
Exactly, absolutely. You just actually started our little foundation for our question that we're going to dive into.
Okay,
Which is
perfect.
great. So, yeah, the listeners, the question that we're going to go into is, when is it the right time to take a creative risk? And as you were saying, like, if you're not as like the research that I was doing, it really like kind of highlighted that if you're not creating an environment for failure, you're not creating an
Yeah.
environment for success. Like, you're not creating an
Yeah.
environment for creativity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it is funny because risk is such a heavy word as well, and it sort of, it errs on the side of bad rather than good. And I think so for me, what I spend a lot of time trying to de-risk risk, if that makes sense. Sort of take
Yeah.
the risk out of
De-risk
riskiness.
risk. Okay. That's
Because
interesting.
yeah, and because I think if you don't allow for failure, if you don't allow for iteration in terms of creative development, then you'll never get to somewhere new. And one of the great stories I love, actually comes from uh, Thomas Edison, who
Mm.
inventing the light bulb, talked about the fact that he said famously, "There's no such thing as an aha moment." You don't sort of go to bed one night and then wake up the next morning and go, "Oh my God, I've invented the light bulb." You
Yeah.
know, he developed, before we got the light bulb that we know today. He developed 600 different versions of that light bulb, each time failing in some way, and going, "Oh, well, that doesn't work." But he would say that each failure was like, the response was, "Well, that's interesting," and then he
Mm.
would go and iterate on that and come back with something else, and again would fail, but he would learn something from that and go, "Well, that's interesting." So he said it wasn't like suddenly he had the light bulb. It was a long process that eventually got to the point where it was an incredible innovation that worked. So and I think if he wasn't prepared to sort of take those risks along the way, and fail, then we would never have got to the end of that. And the interesting thing a lot of people don't even know is he wasn't the only one developing a light bulb at the
Mm.
time, the
Mm.
electric light. There were other inventors and companies who were, going down the same path. So there was a little bit of a race on, as there is with a lot of things. It's like space travel. It's like this country's not the only one doing it. There are other people doing it. So I
Yeah.
think he very much said it's not about risk. It's about just doing the work. It's about working through the process and iterating each time.
Yeah.
And I think if you give people permission to say, like, the failures aren't failures, they're just steps in the direction towards the success.
Sure, sure. Do you think though the risk then is would you consider, I'm just thinking about it now as you're speaking, like would you consider the risk being the amount of time you're putting into something?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. The cost of in an industry, certainly in advertising, where a lot of the cost is based on just head hours, to invest the time, that's really all you're paying for. So, to convince, the interesting thing that I've found is to convince anyone to invest in something that happens outside of a financial year is difficult. So to get someone to commit to, say, something that's going to take 3 years to develop, it's
Mm.
very different, because that takes a financial commitment over 3 years rather than 1 year, which a financial CFO has control over that 1 year and can say, "Oh, well, I can invest in it this year, but I want a return, and I want something back that I can then make money from." But if you can't do that for several years, so that is one of the risks of the sort of the fun, yeah, the hours and the time and the financial investment in it, is a huge part of it. And for me, one of the things I sort of work with clients a lot um, is helping them feel brave, because
Mm.
I think if you don't, I mean, I work every day in creative development, so I'm kind of used to that behavior. But if you don't, if you're not in that space, then you need sort of a way to help you, as I said, de-risk risks. So sort of help you feel brave to take the chances and the choices that will eventually lead to something great. So I've kind of developed a lot of different processes that don't seem like they're taking risks, but help clients get to a place where they discovered innovation. So it doesn't seem like a risk at the time, but helping them get to somewhere new. So that's because I think, anything new is risky because it's new and you've never seen it before, and will it work, will it not work? And
Sure.
that's the challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just thinking now, like, do you tend to kind of probe the person to kind of get to the area or get to the solution or like the project itself without you kind of saying it, but kind of
Yes.
navigating them to it where they come up with it themselves?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I mean, we have a philosophy within our company, which is, it's called, we encourage everyone to move from selling to solving. So instead of trying to sell an idea to someone, solve a problem and bring them on the journey with them. So that in the end, it's not what I hate is I hate, like, in a relationship, like professional relationship, one person has the right of veto and the other person has to accept that. Like,
Yeah.
I like to have relationships with my clients where it's like, we are partners in this, and we will get to a place where we both should agree that this is the right thing to do. And I think that if you bringing clients on that journey with you is super important, because if you don't, to your point just then, if you say, all right, I'll come back to you in 6 months with the solution or whatever it might be, then they've got no investment in the process that got to the end. So ultimately, all they can do is give you a point of view and of, I like it or I don't. But if they've been through the process and they've seen all the things the turns that you could have taken that you didn't, you could have gone that way, you didn't do it, and you've sort of pressure tested an idea along the way, then you go both going to get to that point at the end where you go, this is the right thing to do. We should just do it. So it doesn't feel like a risk when you're involved in the whole iterative process, I think.
Sure, sure. So then, like, well, what helps you then connect or like relate to these like tech business focused people? Like, because that's not your role. But they're in it
Mm,
for the business. They're trying to make their business expand and
yeah,
so on. So how are
yeah.
you relating to them?
Well, the funny thing is, I grew up in a family where my father was an accountant, and the two kind of skills that I had when I left school that I was best at were art and accounting, which is a really odd combination of financial and creative, and I think
Okay.
that's not that common. And I remember this great quote from David Ogilvy, which he said, "Think like a creative, talk like an accountant." And I think
Oh,
that is what clients want to hear. They don't want you walking in there going, "Oh, this is really creative," and we should, they want you going into their offices saying, uh, "This idea, I think, will help grow the business 7% in the next 6 months," or whatever. Like they want you to talk about the ROI of the idea, not about it's so pretty and like look.
yeah.
I've always kind of tried to have that understanding of business. I mean, I'm not a managing director or anything like that, but I think because I grew up in that business environment with my father and have an understanding of that, uh, I'm able to sort of pitch ideas to clients in terms of the return it will make for their business, not necessarily just and why it will impact their business, rather than just it's not creativity for creativity's sake, which I think is what they want to hear.
Sure, sure. And how would this differ for someone like, when you were starting out and like taking this approach, like relative to being established as you are now? Like, obviously, you're given the floor to take a greater risk because of
Yeah.
the opportunity and the things that you've done and all the great things you've done so far. But if you remember back to starting out for someone who hasn't, like, how will that differ in the risk that you're able to take?
Yeah. Well, and look, it's hugely important because, when you're younger and you're starting out, you don't have control of that relationship with the client necessarily. You can meet with clients, etc., but you ultimately, they tend to, the person in charge of that relationship is the more senior person. So I think for me, I hugely encourage young creative people to develop those relationships with clients and learn their language and learn how they speak so that you can, you know, sell an idea back to them in that way. Um, I remember when I was I was maybe 24 or something like that, and I was working for an agency in Perth, and we just won a big airline, Ansett Airlines. So we'd won the airline account,
Mm,
and the CEO came in and was explaining to the agency how we won. And the brief to the agency was, give us a new campaign for the airline, etc. And it's like, yeah, okay, that's. And he walked in and he said, you know what? He said they didn't care. They didn't care about the advertising. They cared about the business. And he said,
mm.
so do you know how we won this account? And everyone was like, no, how did we win the account? And he said, I told them, and pardon my French, he said, I told them to answer the fucking phone. And it's like, what do you mean by that? He said, well, as I was researching the brand, I realized that their call center couldn't handle the volume of calls coming in. So they were losing business because they weren't answering the phone. And he said, so I helped them understand if we bring in this external supplier, expand the call center, then you'll be able to increase your business. And I was like, that is genius. Like,
Yeah.
that's not like, it's such a simple solution, but it's actually someone who understands the business behind, it's not necessarily like advertising would just push more people into the call center that couldn't handle the calls. So
Yeah.
and that to me was such a lesson. I'm like, oh my God, you've got to look into the business and go, what is stopping them, or how can we, advertising definitely works, but if there's a broken part in the business, how do
It's
you
not,
get
it's going to be
that?
useless.
It's
Yeah.
useless, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and I think that's and I look at that as creativity. Like I think that's a
Yeah.
creative, it's not necessarily
Problem
what
solving.
people. Yeah, it's problem solving, and it's using a creative mind to go, all right, I can solve that problem in a creative way. So and I think that's, to me, that we talk about risk. There's no risk in that. That's understanding that the
Mm,
business can grow and I can help you grow it. And of course they're like, oh, well, we want to work with a company like this who understands our business and realizes that then we'll do a campaign and we'll push more
yeah,
people into, So it was,
exactly.
and that was a real lesson for me at a young age of like, oh, okay, that changed the way I thought.
Sure.
Which was good to learn that early on.
Exactly. It's like a holistic approach there. Like people don't think that,
Yeah,
but as a
yeah,
whole, you need to take into consideration what's going on or where is a person losing money or not gaining any before you start
yeah.
giving them an
Well, and
idea.
it's interesting because as a, as a copywriter, as I was my career, my study consisted of pure creativity. Like it was writing and drawing and typography and all that kind of. There wasn't actually any business in it,
Mm,
it does make me realize that we are advertising is a business.
yeah.
If you can't speak the language of business, there's no point.
No.
And I think it's I think I was lucky in that I had some sort of intuitive background because I'd grown up in that environment that it made sense to me. But I think that's where a lot of young creators fail because they don't understand that they need to understand business as well as creativity, and then bring the creative solutions to the business.
Sure. So, like, I reckon that would probably be more than 50% of the like what you'd have to like. The
Mm,
creativity wouldn't even be the core aspect of it; it'd be the business side, which would be more
yeah,
of the chunk of it.
yeah, definitely. And I think I guess that's what I love about advertising these days is, for me, advertising almost doesn't look like advertising anymore. I think you can apply creativity to so many aspects of the way business runs. And I think I love using my brain in creative ways to solve business problems,
Yeah.
rather than, it's not necessarily about coming up with an ad campaign. Because I think, it's funny, like, especially young people will say, well, they don't believe, they don't believe advertising. They don't like advertising. And I'm like, yeah, but, if you think about young people, they love it when they go to a Coachella and Absolute Vodka sponsors a tent with a DJ in it, and
Yes.
that's advertising.
Exactly.
so
That's a
so
good
yeah,
point. Yeah.
yeah. All they're saying is I don't like TV ads that yell at me, and I'm like, yeah, fair enough. And so let's not do that. Let's
No.
give people experiences and that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. It can be done in so many different. There's so many platforms for
Yeah,
you to do it.
yeah,
So,
exactly.
so how do you keep like the creative juices flowing then in the business world? Like, what are you doing yourself?
I have a huge kind of network of. I'm lucky in that I'm connected to creative directors all over the world, and I gather all of the things that they come up with, and get inspired by different things that are happening in different countries. But I also have been running a program for quite a while, which I do within the agency, called Curiosity Sessions,
Hmm.
and I run them around the world, uh, with different sort of speakers and people just coming and talking about creativity and how they use creativity in their life or in their business. And I find that incredibly inspiring. And for me, I've had some great people over the years. When I first got to New York, I remember I there's a big Broadway play called Avenue Q, which was like basically puppets, but naughty puppets. So it was like raunchy puppets, and it was huge. It
Yeah.
won like 9 Tonys and everything. And through a friend of a friend, I met the guy who wrote the show, and I invited him to come into the office. And I was really intrigued about, well, how does creativity work when you're writing a musical? Like, where does that come from? And I learned so many interesting things from him about how he applied creativity to what he was doing. And one of the things that that one of the examples that he talked about. So Avenue Q, this is a musical with puppets, and it has like there's one main song, which sort of sets the theme for the show, which you'll appreciate. The song is called "What Do You Do with a BA in English," which is basically like, it's now that I've got this useless degree, what do I do? And but he was saying at the beginning he wanted that song to be like the main song from Rainbow Connection, the Kermit the Frog. He wanted it to be like set up the tone. And he said, so what I did is I wrote the song to the music of Rainbow Connection.
Ah,
And then he used this phrase. He said, then I kicked sand over it and changed it. And it became this completely different original song, but that's where it started from. And I
yeah.
thought it was really interesting to sort of shamelessly go, all right, I'm going to take inspiration from that. I'm going to write lyrics to that tune, and then I'm going to change the tune. And so if you didn't know, you would never listen to this song and go, oh, that's the same as Rainbow Connection. You can't
No,
hear it at all. But
sure.
interestingly, he had a piano when he was doing the Curiosity session, and he played the song to the music of Rainbow Connection. And you're like, wow, it is exactly that.
It's connected,
And so,
yeah.
yeah, so I love getting inspiration from people outside of advertising, and going, well, what is your creative process, and how do you develop new and innovative ideas? And that was just one example of like an idea that I've kept. Kick sand over it, take inspiration from something that and then change it, make it your own.
Mm,
So I do that a lot. And I've had, over the years, I've had like, you know, uh, cartoonists who, like a guy came in who's done like 20 covers of the New Yorker magazine, and talked to him about his process, and wonderful photographers, and scientists even, because, like people go, science is very, regimented, etc. But for me, science is one of the most creative things in the
absolutely.
world. I mean,
Yeah.
it's incredible the leaps that scientists make, and sort of understanding, well, how does their brain work that they get to that point where they make this leap, that they go like, I work in health, and I'm doing a lot of work in oncology and cancer. And I look at a process like CAR T technology, which is basically where they take the plasma out of your blood, out of your whole body, treat it externally, and then put it back in and use it to fight the cancer. And I'm like,
Oh,
who thought of that?
that's
Like,
amazing.
yeah. And I mean, to me, the creativity that a mind would go, well, what if we take all their blood out, process it, and put it? And I'm like, it's mind blowing.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow,
Like,
that's it.
yeah.
That's amazing.
So I really appreciate listening to other people, and understanding how they use creativity to solve problems like that, and then bringing it to what I do and going, well, if you thought like that, we could solve this problem in a new and interesting way. And it's super fun, because creativity is ultimately just joyful.
Exactly. I love that. That is incredible. That's an incredible thing there. Now it's making me think. You just telling me that story is making me like, I could do all kinds of
Yeah.
things. Yeah,
And yeah,
that's
I mean, and again, to go back to that Einstein, Edison thing, is like, I'm sure somebody didn't wake up one day and just go, why don't I do
no.
this? You've got to do the work. Creativity is about hard work. You've got to do the process and make mistakes and go, all right, well, that didn't work, but what I liked is this happened when I did that, and I'll take this and I'll do that.
Sure.
So, I think that a lot of people who don't work in the field of creativity do think it's just like people sitting around with their feet up on a desk going, aha.
Yeah.
it's it's
That's
just
so
not
true.
that.
No, it's so
It's,
much more fun than that.
yeah. Exactly.
Exactly.
And it's a
Exactly.
job, and it's a process, and you got to go through it, and I always say, just, you got to do the work.
Sure, exactly, exactly. So then what would give like one creative project momentum over another?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I love doing stuff that feels like it solves like a genuine human problem. Like I
Mm,
think, I mean, it's one of the reasons that I think I was drawn to work in the health space. You know, uh, and I think when you talk about creativity and you give people an example of something that you think, that could change lives, then it sort of gathers momentum because of the importance of doing that. One of the clients that I was blessed to work alongside with for like 5 years was an organization called Water is Life. And they essentially, what they did is they provided fresh water. They drilled wells in countries and towns that didn't have access to clean water. So in Haiti, in Africa, in India, um, and when I first started working with them, what I realized is certainly in Africa, one of the biggest killers of children is drinking polluted water.
Cholera. Yeah.
1 in 5 children in Africa doesn't make it to the age of 5 because they get a waterborne disease because they're drinking polluted water. And I was like, oh my God, this is a huge and important issue. And I worked with that organization and helped them kind of over 4 or 5 years develop sort of platforms for fundraising, etc. And I know during the time we worked with them, the donations went up maybe 5,000%.
Wow.
And and when I could see that directly translated, like I remember getting a letter from a young Kenyan boy who we'd built the Water is Life had built a well in his town, and we had filmed him as part of the campaign.
Is that the true story biography movie that they made about him?
I don't think it's the same kid,
but maybe another one.
Yeah, but maybe another one. I'm sure it's a common story. But this little boy sent me a gift from Kenya via the company to say, thank you, Mr. Matt, for helping us build a well in our town. And I was like, oh my God, like this is incredible. So I feel like the projects that get momentum for me are the ones that really touch people in a way that you can see the impact it's going to have and the way it's going to improve someone's quality of life, or I mean that's a pretty extreme example because we're talking about life and death of young children and stuff. But I think the humanity side of that is kind of what makes people get on board and support work like that. And certainly in the health industry, the issues we're dealing with on a daily basis are hugely impactful. And we're working with a client at the moment who's doing a lot of study in the area of Parkinson's disease. And Parkinson's is when people get the shudders, and they've developed technology which is they insert something into the body which is basically like a switch. And I watched this woman who's got Parkinson's, and they turn it off. And so she's like this. They turn it off on this side, and you can see her arm goes like this. And then they turned it off on this side, and her arm goes like this. And then they say, we're going to turn it back on now. And she calms down, and she doesn't.
Wow.
I'm like, that's what I want to be involved in.
Yeah.
I want to
That's
do
fantastic.
stuff. Yeah. So, that's why I love working with companies that are pursuing that kind of innovation.
Sure. Is that what drew you? Like, I want to make a real big impact here. I want to change, and I want to better humans and
I think so.
Good for the world.
And when I realized, certainly that Water is Life case study is a great example. When I realized that for me, creativity is something that I just have within me and work hard to grow. And I'm like, the fact that I could use a skill that I have and I could help save lives just by doing what I do naturally, is like, it's not hard for me.
No.
It's like, I mean, it's enjoyable because creativity is fun,
Yes.
and I'm like, okay, well, what if I could do that every day, all day? And that's what I ended up doing. Why I work in health, and I work with, helping cancer patients, survive. And, so it's very rewarding, which I'm not sure everyone can say that about their job. So,
No, that's fantastic. I love that. I love, a lot of people I think have this kind of misconception that a lot of people who are in the advertising world only want to market like, silly thing, not silly, but
and they're not like very commercial and
exactly.
No, I agree. And it's, look, and I've done my fair share of, launching a new car and, a burger and all that. And I've certainly done all that. And you find the fun within it every time. But I think that the older I got, and as I became more aware of the power that I had within creativity, I'm like, what if I redirect this? I do, and it suits me perfectly to be able to use that to do things like help that woman with Parkinson's. And I mean, we did a really cool thing just late last year. someone in our office in New York had read some research to say that I didn't know this, but one of the early markers of Parkinson's disease is you start to lose your sense of smell.
Mm.
And one of the smells that goes first is coffee. And we're like, really? That's so interesting. So we partnered with a whole bunch of coffee chains in New York
Yeah.
and San Francisco, and basically printed these special mugs saying, if you can't smell the coffee, then maybe you have early Parkinson's, signs of Parkinson's. So go and get checked.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what a simple and creative way to
Fantastic.
turn every coffee shop into like a little diagnostic center that you go, I can't. So I should go and investigate that a little bit further.
Yeah.
And I think that's just it's a small but just a great example of like you could change someone's life with early treatment if you get them at the right time. So that's creativity for me.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's fantastic. That actually just makes me think of, coffee and its benefit. Like I was reading some studies about how, well, just because with our situation in the world right now, like with a lot of respiratory problems, especially for babies, they actually give them caffeine to open their airways.
Right.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I have this respiratory problem since I went to Thailand. I got dengue fever, and
Oh no.
the symptoms pop up every time I get a cold or something. So my airways I can't breathe at all.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
noticed like if
Interesting.
I had a cup of coffee, I'm like, oh, I'm breathing well again. And so I started reading up about it.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I'm going to take that and turn it into something.
Yeah,
we
do
do a
it.
lot. We do a lot of work in respiratory, with patients who have respiratory problems. So, but that to me, that's the thing. You need a mind like an antenna that's just constantly like hearing these
Exactly.
interesting things and going, oh, I can apply that. We can do something with that. And
Exactly.
it's funny. We found this company recently. We're working on a project. We found this company that turns pollution into plastic. And so it extracts pollution out of the air and builds this sort of bioplastic. And we were thinking that because one of the biggest problems for asthma sufferers is pollution.
Yes.
So what if we built the inhaler out of plastic that took the pollution out of the air?
Oh, wow.
Well,
That's
like, so the actual inhaler
yeah.
partly solves the problem even before you've inhaled it. So and I'm like, so for me, it's just finding out stuff like that
Yeah,
and
yeah,
go,
yeah.
I think I can apply that over here. And,
Exactly. That's
yeah, so
fantastic.
it's just super cool to be able to make those leaps. And, I mean, I think, and that's one of the things I love about the job I do, because a lot of it is just like, read interesting books, read magazines, watch an unusual TV show, and just learn stuff. And that's the job. Then
Yeah.
take that and make a
Put it
connection
together.
with something else. And I mean, it's weird because you obviously never know where it's going to come from.
No.
And like you just telling me that story about coffee with respiratory, I didn't know that. So, but now I'm like, okay, that's interesting. I'll tell
Yeah.
someone else, and we'll think about
Exactly.
how we could do that.
It's
So yeah,
fantastic.
it's just sort of, but that's being open to new things all the time.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I was reading. I don't know if you've read this book. It's called "The Runaway Species" by Anthony Brandt and David Eagleman. So David Eagleman's a neuroscientist, and it's called "How Human Creativity Remakes the World." But when I was reading it, there was a point there which I thought was really interesting. I'm curious to hear what you think about this. It
Yeah.
says much of creative thinking happens unconsciously.
Yeah. No, I definitely think that. And one of the things I learnt, and it took a long time, is to stop panicking about not having a creative idea. So
Mm,
the challenge within advertising is that it's not just endless creativity; it's creativity on a deadline. So
yes.
like clients, they'll give you a task, but I need it by Thursday, and you're like, oh my god. And I remember when I was younger, there'd be moments where I'd be like the night before the presentation and I'm like, I've got nothing. And I would stress myself so badly that I was in such a non-creative state that I'd kind of
Mm,
freaked my brain out and I couldn't think. And, and, and I would always, and when I'd be at that point and I'm like, well, this is the end of my career. Like I'm done. I'm out of, it was just so like, it's over. I've got no more
yeah.
ideas. And what I realize is, to your point, is when you relax, when you let yourself just be you and put yourself in an environment where creativity can come in, and almost use that sort of subconscious, then you are creative. Like, I was so afraid at that point, as the deadline loomed, to step away from the piece of paper that had in front of me that I was supposed to think of ideas on. And what I realized is, go to a movie, like
Yeah.
read a book, like do
Yeah.
anything else but sit there staring at that white sheet of paper going, why can't I come up with an idea? Because it just makes it worse. And it took a long time to realize that if you don't put creative thinking into your mind, you don't get creative thinking out. So to allow yourself in those subconscious moments to just be inspired by a piece of film that you saw, or a poem that you read, or a conversation you had with a stranger on the street or whatever, it is kind of what you have to do to be open to creativity all the time. And it does take I think young people a while to work that out. And that's that fear of, oh my God, this is it, it's over, I've run out. I think
Exactly.
a
Yeah,
lot
and
of
you're
creative people
right.
go through that.
Yeah,
They,
you stare at the paper. You sit there staring at the paper. I don't have an idea. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? Instead
yeah,
of like, I've realized that myself over the years.
yeah,
I'm like, I'm going to read a book.
yeah, yeah. Just
I'm going
forget
to,
about it and
yeah.
do
You get
something
an idea.
else. Yeah,
Exactly. You get an idea from a conversation. I start talking to
yeah,
somebody and diving into the conversation. Like, oh, it just something
yeah,
happens and it comes to you.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, I get
No,
much of what
and
he was saying in that
well, and
sentence.
I had read up about kind of why that happens, and apparently there is a sort of a graph of creativity of, quite often, people say that peak stress when you get to, like, I can't think of anything creative, and then you let yourself off the hook. You go, oh
Mm,
well, I'm done, and
yeah.
you come down the other side, and then suddenly bang. And so it's almost, people are saying that's the creative hotspot, sweet spot, where you let yourself go and and just be open again, instead of the stress that you had of, I need to come up with something. And I imagine it's the same for songwriters and
Yeah.
artists, and like, people talk, writer's block is something people talk about a lot. But again, I think it's about, how do you manage those moments where you feel devoid of creativity, and I think it's feeding stuff into your mind, constantly.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think like a lot of people say take a nap
Yeah,
as well.
yeah,
They're like, have a
yeah,
little siesta, and somehow the idea
yeah,
will come
yeah.
to you when you wake up.
Well, and there's all these theories about being in the shower, and being around water, because water has certain ions, and that encourages. So I think that there's a lot of different things that you can do to kind of put yourself in a situation where you can be more creative.
Sure, exactly. What do you think about this? Because I've known a lot of people now. There's like some people that I follow, like Vishen Lakiani. He's got this company called Mind Valley, and other people, and Dr. Joe Dispenza and that. And one of the things that they were trying, and I've been reading up a lot about this, is ayahuasca. It's supposed to give you creative ideas. Have you heard about that or tried it
I,
yourself?
I mean, I've never tried it, but I've heard about it. I mean,
Yeah.
again, I'm probably a bit scared to try that, but it's interesting, and I mean, I've heard. I don't know if you're familiar with Xerox PARC in Silicon Valley. So
Mhm.
Xerox PARC was, it was like a innovation center that Xerox put together. It was PARC, PARC, Palo Alto Research Center, and they were the ones that invented a lot of the early things for computers. So they invented the mouse. They invented when computers first came out. Remember, they just had green screen, and they invented the
Yeah.
kind of the visual layout of which is where Apple sort of got their ideas from, etc. And I remember reading about Xerox PARC and the fact that they had like showers there specifically for people to go and just sit in the shower for
Oh,
half an
wow.
hour. And I'm like, that's really interesting. Like, to create a space that is ultimately designed to encourage creativity and find what works for you or whatever. So maybe they had an ayahuasca room. Yeah,
Exactly. I
yeah,
know, like the problem, like the symptoms of that aren't good. The feeling apparently isn't supposed to be good, but a lot of people come out with it and they're like, they have a full written, like it's
like
like
a
step by step,
vision. Yeah,
a vision of an idea, and they come out with
yeah,
like a whole thing. I'm like, oh, okay, wow.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. I think you got to be prepared to try different things and different processes and see what works for you, because I'm sure it's not the same for everyone, and the things that work for me maybe not don't work for someone else. But again, that's part of the joy of the creative process, isn't it? Of like what stimulates you, and that's why I do these curiosity sessions, because I'm incredibly intrigued by particularly people in different fields. What stimulates their creativity, and like I don't know if you watched that Alexander McQueen documentary.
No.
Talking about him before he passed as a fashion designer. And it's incredibly interesting to see the historical influence in the fashion that he came up, and the sort of periods of history that he would study and be inspired by to turn into this incredibly modern sort of haute couture fashion. And you're like, oh my god, that came from the Renaissance period. But it's just so interesting that the things that different people seek inspiration from and how they take it and turn it into something else.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, that was fantastic. That was fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Matt. This has been an incredible, incredible conversation for myself. Something I always ask my guest speakers at the end of the episode, I always ask, has this conversation right now with me either highlighted anything to you or made you reflect differently about anything?
Well, yes. I mean, I love talking about creativity, but you've just given me a couple of things that I want to go and investigate further, and you've reminded me of pursuing other new and interesting ways of helping people develop their creativity. So, I want to, I'm always about commercial creativity in a way, because that's what advertising is. So I want to take some of the things we've talked about and go, all right, how can I bring my clients through that process and help them get better at exercising that part of their brain. So yeah, no, I've loved it. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you for coming onto the podcast.
See you later.
Awesome. Thank you for listening to Get to Know You. If you enjoyed this podcast, rate, review, and share the podcast on Facebook or Instagram. You can tag me at Get to Know You with Tiffany Farag. In my mission to open conversations and access deeper dialogue, I want to hear from you, listeners. The question again, what is the right time to take a creative risk? Leave an audio, video, or a message on the Facebook or Instagram page of your response to today's question, including your name and where you are from. We will include some different responses in next week's Get to Know You Cafe to further deepen dialogue on this topic. If you have any topics you would like us to discuss, be sure to tag me in a post with your question. Join us every Tuesday on Get to Know You.